Hello, bonsoir, and welcome to the Get French Football News Show. I'm Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening are Eric Devin and Rich Allen. It's the first international break and our first taste of the UEFA Nations League, and while some people can't wrap their heads around it, France are finding their way as the current world champions. But did they shine or did they stutter in their first chance after their crowning glory? We'll find out after the news. France played Germany on Saturday evening. It was their first game for the Nations Cup, and they drew 0-0, with Alphonse Areola being the only change from that starting lineup from the World Cup. But the Paris Saint-Germain goalkeeper walked away with the Man of the Match trophy. In tonight's game, the French have won eventually 2-1 against the Netherlands. It went ahead through Kylian Mbappe, only to be pegged back after half-time by Ryan Babel, with old reliable Olivier Giroud popping up with the winner to see them go provisionally top of the group. In Ligue 1 news, there is a new man at the helm at Bordeaux, and it's their former coach, Ricardo, joining. It's having Patrick Colette as his assistant coach. After some years away from French football, he has returned to help with new owners who are provisionally, according to French TV at least, as saying that they will have around 80 million in terms of investment into the club, should that deal go through sometime later this month. Elsewhere in Ligue 1 news, Kylian Mbappe has been given a 3-match suspension after his red card against Nîmes. The LFP's disciplinary commission has decided that the French star needed a 3-match sit-down after his incident with Teji Savanier in that 4-2 victory. And finally, in some retirement news, at least anyway, Lille captain and former Coupe de France winner with Bordeaux as well, Rio Mavuba, has called time on his playing career. The 34-year-old has been with a number of Ligue 1 clubs, including Bordeaux and a French international, and leaves a big CV behind him. And that's all for your news. But for all the latest, head on over to our website at www.forgetfootballnewsfrance.com and follow us on Twitter at GFFN. We start this week with those games for Les Bleus, and one win and one draw to start off their Nations League campaign as they look to head to the finals that will be played in the summer. Eric, we'll start with that game against Germany first, because that was a bit more of a, at least some may say, a war of attrition. A lot of the play was for Deutschland, really, but in the end, it was a decent result against a strong side. And the real positive is that with Hugo Lloris and Steven Mandanda currently injured, Alphonse Areola really showed what he can do between the sticks.
Yeah, he's a player that we've definitely seen a lot from. I think that, it worried me when PSG brought in Gigi Buffon from a standpoint of how that can affect Areola's development. I think that he'd really come on leaps and bounds last year and establishing himself as that first choice keeper, playing some really fine matches down the back end of the season, and putting on a couple good displays in the Champions League as well. For the national team, obviously having Hugo Lloris and Steven Mandanda still in the prime of their careers, his opportunities were always going to be limited, but he seems to have taken this with both hands. I fully expect that Lloris, as soon as he is fit, will continue to captain this team at least through the next European Championship cycle. But I think I'm a lot less nervous about depth in terms of France's goalkeeping, particularly as we look to the World Cup 2022 and beyond, where Lloris may cease to become involved at that point in time. But yeah, I think to the match overall as well, I think that this was a clean sheet for France. They did well in the World Cup, but it wasn't exactly done with a series of 1-0 wins. They tended to concede, a fair amount of goals. Thinking about that Argentina match, even the final as well. And I think to see them be able to buckle down and show perhaps a different side of themselves tactically, not necessarily be negative, but control the match even without having much possession, and to really limit Germany from having a bevy of quality chances. Again, Areola did have to make some fine saves, but I think that we see statistics so Germany has X amount more shots, X amount Well, it really didn't seem that France were at 6s and 7s against Germany. It seemed to be they were playing with solidity. But I think we didn't really see as much during that World Cup run, and I think this can continue to be the next evolution for this side as they decide to sort out how this team is going to look going forward.
Yeah, and the evolution we'll sort of come on to in a little bit. That's a little preview to what we're going to discuss a little later. But Rich, what did you think to that opening game? I mean, it was obviously the start of this new Nations League, which we may talk about a little bit later, at least anyway, in terms of it being, a competitive game against a strong side as well. But at the same time, were you a little bit disappointed that France didn't really hit top gear against a team that we know can be really good, but had a really poor World Cup? Obviously have the same scenarios that France have at the moment. Do you feel that France maybe didn't quite put as better performances as they maybe should have, and it was maybe a bit more of a almost a victory lap after the World Cup?
A victory lap, maybe. I don't think France played particularly badly. I think this was always going to be a tricky game for France for two reasons. First, obviously, it's the first game post-World Cup. And I think I read somewhere you have to go back to, I think, Brazil in '94 for the last time a team won the World Cup and then won their next game. So there's always a little bit of a hangover, I suppose. And two, they were obviously away at Germany, who, as you said, has had such an awful tournament, needed to put in some kind of performance to sort of stop that rot carrying on post-World Cup. So I think it was going to be a tricky game, and it proved to be a tricky game. As I say, I don't think France played particularly badly. I think Germany had a little bit more urgency about them, perhaps a little bit more creativity. Areola obviously had a fantastic game. I think there was the Ginter header, wasn't there? That was a really good diving one-hand save. And there was certainly a couple of others that stood out. And I think Opta post-match tweeted out that I think he made six saves, something like that no other French goalkeeper had done in the last 10 years. So, as debuts go, it was probably as impressive as you could get. But yeah, I think it was just a little bit of post-World Cup rustiness. Absolutely nothing to be worried about. I think it's probably perfectly normal for this kind of performance. There was nothing there that worried me. Same players that didn't let us down in the World Cup. Why not stick with them? They're all of an age where they can continue. Maybe one or two exceptions to that, but all in all, it was an okay performance. It's not something that's going to set the world alight, but they didn't really need to set the world alight. They did that in the summer.
Yeah, exactly. I think they might be able to boast for that for 3.5 more years to come at least. Anyway, maybe even slightly more with the calendar change at least. Anyway, but on to events tonight, really. And Eric, they may be a little bit disappointed that what has been a subpar Netherlands team over the last couple of years pegged them back. But at the same time, the important thing, at least from a tournament point of view, was the 3 points against the perceived weaker team in this three-man group. Will they be happy that they at least got the result they wanted tonight?
Yeah, I think certainly still some questions, though. I think for as sound as that defense had been against Germany, I think that there were certainly a lot more questions to be asked, particularly Benjamin Mendy, getting beaten for the Dutch goal. I don't know. I think that a more clinical side would have really had their way with France, and I think that it was really frustrating to see that development. I also didn't really see as much as I would have liked from the midfield this evening. I think Pogba was decent, but perhaps was playing a little bit too far to the left, really not fostering that relationship with Mbappe like we've seen him do. Kanté, not the best match either. I think Gini Wijnaldum had a handful of good runs and looked really a bustling presence in that midfield. I would have liked to see a little bit more from Kanté to limit him. So overall, I think not as strong of a match as they had played against Germany. But again, like you say, a win's a win. This is a competitive fixture. And even as the Netherlands sort of try to retool with a very, very young team, save a few figures here and there, I think to have that win at home, and as the players have said in the aftermath, that they really felt the energy of the crowd. They really felt proud to be bringing the World Cup trophy back to France and to sort of bask in that. So even if this isn't strictly speaking a valedictory performance from France, I still think it shows good character, good grit, determination, and two very well worked goals. Also, I think we shouldn't be remiss in mentioning that the key elements in Blaise Matuidi and Olivier Giroud are also two players who, going back 2 years ago, maybe a lot of people maybe would not have thought would have had much of a feature in this France team. But as you rightly say, they look set to be continue on to the next cycle and continue to play at a high level, even if perhaps their time for their clubs, in Giroud's case at least, does look to be a little bit limited at this point in time.
And that's the interesting point about this, that Giroud was really the saviour on this one, Rich. Someone may point to the fact that they didn't really rotate much, even to try a couple of different players out against a team they were much more favoured in, at least anyway. They're going to be favourites for every game now, being world champions, but much more favoured in it. Was it strange for them not to rotate a little bit, and also onto Giroud himself? It's nice to see him get a goal as well, with even the fans still saying that we love him, but he can sort of maybe be a little bit lacklustre on occasion.
Well, I mean, I can see why there wasn't a rotation. It's obviously the first game back in front of the French crowd. They wanted to give them that, that sort of honour. I fully expect to see a little bit of rotation at the next international break. I think it's in October. I think where there's no Nations League game for France. Certainly the first game there isn't. The first round of those fixtures there isn't. I mean, I perhaps would have liked to have seen some substitutions made a little later, but maybe that's showing you that this Nations Cup is working. It's ultimately a competitive fixture, and I think we saw from Deschamps that he treated it as such. They were substitutions that we have seen him make before, and we saw him make at the World Cup. So, at least there's some respect for this competition, and it's not just being treated as some glorified friendlies. So I think that's quite positive for the tournament as a whole. Again, it wasn't a fantastic performance from France. They did enough. It was great to see Giroud get that goal. He was just starting to, I think, get a little bit of additional criticism over and above what he unfortunately normally gets with that drought, and obviously people bringing up the B word, Benzema, and would he break that unwanted record that Benzema carries? I think it's just over 1,000 minutes. Well, he didn't. He got his goal, took it very, very well. It was an excellent cross from Mendy. Really good, fierce first-time volleyed finish from Giroud. A little bit fortunate, I think, on the goalkeeping. It wasn't an overly strong parry from Cillessen. It was a little bit weak. But then I think Areola, to be fair to him, I think looking back on the Dutch goal, I think he'll be a little bit disappointed to have conceded that. Again, that was quite a weak parry. And on another day, maybe in the Germany game, had that effort come in, he'd have probably turned that round the post. But it was, it was positive. I think things that we can take from it, Mendy is a continued threat, and he is back from that injury. I still don't think he's necessarily doing enough to force himself into the starting 11. I think Hernandez just offers that little bit more in defence. I think the Mendy, as we saw, as Eric pointed out, he got caught out for the Dutch goal, and Kenny Tete Mendy just lost him for the cross that led to the goal. I'd quite like to have seen a little bit more from the midfield. But ultimately it's 2 games, 1 win, 1 draw, undefeated. One of those away at Germany, I'd take that. But there's enough there to take forward, and ultimately that's what Deschamps will continue to want, is to continue not to dwell on that. They've had the remaining part of summer and the start of the season to sort of have that success, but they don't necessarily want to dwell on it too much. They want to continue pushing forward so that in 2 years' time they can be competitive at the European Championships, and then ultimately can then go on and look for a successful defence in 2022. So, ultimately we can't complain. But I know knowing Deschamps, he's quite that perfectionist, and he'll have taken far more notes to take forward, I think.
And plenty of notes that should focus on how this squad will try to evolve a little bit, at least. Anyway, it's always the difficult thing, Eric, after someone's won a World Cup. It is evolution. Now, obviously, the squad call-up that they've done for this set of fixtures, at least, has sort of been a congratulations to those players that did do so well in the World Cup, other than obviously people missing through injury. We know Benjamin Lecomte obviously got a call-up as well, which was nice to see for himself. But how do you think this squad needs to evolve now? There's a lot of youth in that team, so there's a lot of places that will already be cemented, but maybe a couple rotating out, maybe, for example, those in their 30s, and maybe thinking Blaise Matuidi and the likes. For this squad heading into the European Championships in 2 years' time, what are we looking towards as players that are moving out and players that will be pushing for squad berths or even starting berths?
I think the biggest change, I think is a solid replacement for Adil Rami. Whether that's Koscielny coming back to fitness again, that's a question. His age, I believe he's 33 at the end of the year, or whether it's a younger player like a Kurt Zouma, perhaps. I think remains to be seen. But I think that's. I don't think Adil Rami has a place. I mean, we saw how poor he was against Monaco last weekend. I think that's just, I know Deschamps has his loyalties, and I know he prefers right-footed and left-footed players, but that's not a player who has a place for me. Blaise Matuidi, I know he's not a kid anymore, but I think playing his club football in Italy is going to help him. I think we know naturally that Italy is a little bit slower paced, so we've seen players sort of sustain a high level of play into their mid-30s playing there. We can think about Dani Alves and the level of play that he was at, playing for Juventus, getting them to a Champions League final in 2017, for example. And there's other examples to be had, clearly, but I think that he's someone I'd like to continue to be in the team. I mean, we're thinking about constructing a squad. So I know that there are perhaps more eye-catching talents out and about, but I think that Matuidi's ability to play as part of a midfield two, play wide on the left, to still be able to cover a lot of ground, to give other more creative players a bit more freedom, is a really indispensable part of this squad. He's not a player he's a player for whom I've not had a lot of time at various points in his career, but I think his performances last summer have really personally improved his standing for me. I think other players, I don't know. I struggle a little bit with Florian Thauvins' inclusion. That's not for anything he's done for Marseille. I think he's been excellent, continues to be excellent, but it's pretty clear to me that tactically he is not a good fit. And if I'm going to have an option as a wide player, I would maybe rather have someone like, maybe Lacazette, maybe Anthony Martial, maybe look to someone on the under 21s. I think if you have someone like Martin Terrier, for example, at Lyon, has a strong season. His scoring record for the under 21s is pretty strong, 7-7. He's a player that could deserve it. Moussa Dembele is going to be given a big stage with Lyon again. This is not me being a Lyon homer. It's just saying there are a lot of younger, more versatile attackers, I think, that could perhaps take Thauvins' place in that 23.
It's an interesting question, really, Rich, because when you're coming off a World Cup, it feels like you don't really want to change anyone, but at the same time, that might have been the sort of accident that sort of bit Germany in the end, and has bit many other teams that have tried to establish sort of a dominance on a global field, at least anyway, even for the next European Championship. So I do want to focus on one place that Eric mentioned there, and that's Adil Rami. Obviously, there's also a worry for Laurent Koscielny and his sort of long-standing future as a French international. So there is a bit of a hole there, even if it is potentially behind Umtiti and Varane, given their performances at the World Cup and their standing and their age as well. Who's the one that's maybe going to fill that hole as the next man up if one of those two are out? Is there anyone in the under-21s or anyone that's sort of floating around the squad at the moment that you feel will be strong enough to fill that position?
Well, I think it's quite curious. Deschamps has always been one to advocate the use of, for his 4 centre-backs, he wants 2 left-footed centre-backs, 2 right-footed centre-backs. And that's probably the reason why Rami was called up to the World Cup squad ahead of the likes of Clement Longley, again, ahead of the likes of Laporte. If Deschamps wants to stick with that principle, and he wants to then look at youth, then yeah, I think you're looking at Kurt Zouma. I think his move to Everton hopefully should play out for him pretty well. I think he may want to keep an eye out on how Issa Diop does at West Ham, and to hopefully avoid being accused of favouritism in any way. Now he's moved, but I'd be interested to see how Joris Gnagnon. He did initially declare himself unavailable for France, and he was going to play for I think the Ivory Coast, I think. But he's now sort of reneged on that and is now back in the French under-21 setup. He's got that move to Sevilla. He's going to be playing hopefully alongside someone like Simon Kjaer, who's obviously a very experienced, very good centre-back, and Clement Longley obviously learnt a lot from him the last couple of seasons. So if Gnagnon manages to get into that Sevilla side and establish himself as a first-choice centre-back there and could go on to have even sort of half the success that Clement Longley has, then he really does force himself into being a serious candidate for that role. That's if Deschamps wants to carry on with the 2 left-footed, 2 right-footed centre-backs. If he doesn't, and he's willing to be a little bit flexible on that, then you'd have to think, the likes of Laporte, who now seems to be a first choice at Manchester City. You'd have to think that finally, it would be his time to make himself get into that squad and make himself a permanent member of it. But then, of course, it's going to be interesting to see how Longley does it at Barcelona. He may be forced to fight for a position against Umtiti. I don't quite know how he fits into that. How he fits into that Barcelona setup. But I think it's going to be a case of, what does Deschamps want to do? Does he want to stand by what the plan that he has done for the last few seasons, or is he willing to bend his own rules? So there's certainly options there. France are pretty blessed in that centre back department, and nearly all of them now are playing top flight football and playing top flight football regularly. So it's a nice selection dilemma, I think, for Deschamps to have.
Yeah, you can't really grumble if you're in that scenario, at least, really. But the final thing I sort of want to mention on the squad potentially evolving, at least, I want to test to you on this one, Eric, was some interesting attacking options, at least. But is there any player that's currently playing, whether that's in obviously French football or around the globe, that is a French potential international that would sort of force their way into this squad because of their qualities and bits? Is there anyone you're looking at the moment that in the next year or so will have the quality and the consistency to force them way into the side, even with already established players in the squad?
I think I have to keep coming back to Martin Terrier. This is a player who can play as a striker. He has a wiry physicality. He has good pace. He can play on either flank. He can play a more creative role. And I think if he's given the chance, even with the arrival of Dembele, to play regularly at Lyon, I think he's really going to turn a lot of heads this season. I think that perhaps he operated a little bit in the shadows last season at Strasbourg. Not a club who have a lot of exposure, especially internationally. And then, after struggling with injury and sort of his season was shut down early, he didn't really feature that much in the second half. I don't think he necessarily got the exposure that he otherwise might have. But I think that given how consistently he's performed for the under-21s, he deserves at least a look in. And I think, should ideally look to be a part of that France side, whether it's for, if Thomas Lemar struggles to establish himself with Atletico, I know he wasn't in great form at Monaco before departing, or whether it's Thauvin. I think that, again, not that I'm saying if you put these players side by side, that Thauvin or Lamar are a better player than Terrier. But I do think that his versatility and his willingness to work. I know we see Strasbourg. We saw him last year with Strasbourg be a really integral part of a high pressing system under Thierry Loret, and I think that could be very valuable as well. Given those qualities that we do see in the likes of Griezmann, for example.
There's always sort of a player that explodes onto the scene, Rich. We've had it in likes of Dembele and Mbappe, obviously, in more recent years, and we might even have a few more if luck precedes us. But is there anyone else you're eyeing? Maybe one of those midfielders from Lyon, maybe breaking into the team at all?
Yeah, I think the two you probably look at would be Houssama and Tanguy Ndombele. Neither have had the best of starts to the season, but neither have Lyon as a whole particularly. I think we know what talents they both are. I think it's important now that they get a very solid second season under their belts. First season breakthrough can be a little easier. It's making sure that you follow that up to prove that you're not some flash in the pan. They both could very well this season force themselves into the reckoning. I think what will be quite an interesting one will be to see how Moussa Dembele does at Lyon. If he can replicate the goal scoring form that he had for Fulham and Celtic and really hit the ground running in that Lyon side. With Giroud, nearing the end, I don't necessarily want to see it, but we've got to face facts that he is nearing the end, and maybe at 31, maybe he doesn't quite have it in him to make it to the European Championships. Maybe by then Deschamps will have looked to have evolved that team so that it perhaps isn't relying him as that central striker. Then maybe that then opens up the opportunity to someone like Moussa Dembele. I know Lacazette will be sort of licking his lips, thinking, okay, when Giroud goes, perhaps that's my time to finally shine, especially as he perhaps looks like he's forced his way back into the starting 11 at Arsenal under Emery. But yeah, I think if Moussa Dembele can really hit that ground running with Lyon, I think Deschamps would be quite keen. He's obviously, Dembele's had good form for the youth teams throughout. He's scored goals at all levels for the French youth teams. So yeah, I think he's potentially one to keep an eye on that could be drafted in. I think throughout this during the duration of this Nations League.
And that's the topic, really. Perfect segue there, Rich, that I want to talk about is the Nations League itself. There's been a lot of discussion in the last sort of couple of days, at least anyway, with everyone a little bit confused about the format, but I think it's a little bit more simpler than people are trying to make it out to be. Eric, it's a good positive for especially a lot of the smaller nations being able to play each other and gain that experience. The benefit for France is facing bigger teams. Will that give them, do you think that in the long run with this new Nations League and the games that they are playing against, 2 games against Germany, 2 games against Netherlands, and then hopefully should they qualify, then the potential at least of 2 big games against 2 more big sides as well. In those competitive scenarios, does that give them an even more greater advantage when they go to those major tournaments, that they have those experiences against big teams in big games now?
Absolutely. I think we saw tonight that, even against a side like the Dutch, who were clearly in a rebuilding phase, that there is very little margin for error, and that it was the same situation against Germany. Both of these matches turned on single moments. Ariola's save on Thursday evening, Giroud's goal tonight. But we also saw, in that defensive lapse again from Mendy, that solidity is going to be a necessary thing and is going to have to be reinforced. I think we saw in the World Cup that Pavard and Hernandez took their places sort of as needs must, that Sidibe and Mendy weren't quite fit. But I think that we also saw that Deschamps has realized the value of having fullbacks who are more defensively oriented, and how that can allow France to progress and create a solid base. And I know that I know that it might be surprising for some folks listening to hear Mendy talked about in these terms, but I think that for all the gifts he's shown, I know in not a very long time at Manchester City, but also in 2 seasons ago at Monaco, that he and, well, Sidibe again, clearly, that it's that what it takes to win and progress in tournament football can't be left to chance with a player who's going to be derelict in his approach to the game. Well, we saw it during the tournament, incredibly strong efforts from the likes of Matuidi, the likes of Pogba over this past summer, in working really hard to allow France to have success. And that sort of holistic team effort, players working for each other, that's going to be the great modicum of success. And that's what did allow France to have so much success this summer. So I think that consistently playing at a high level is going to keep that value of positivity going, because the players know and realize that there is a very little margin for error, which is the kind of mentality that one would want a team to have, particularly as you head into later rounds of a competition, be it the World Cup or be it the European Championships in 2 years' time.
And that's the interesting question, at least on the other side of this coin, Rich, for the bigger teams, at least anyway. The friendlies, while not necessarily ideal because they're not competitive, and you want to try and blood that in the years, especially when you're maybe not hosting a tournament or something like that. But at the same time, with a lack of friendlies, at least anyway in this half of the year, does that worry you about in terms of experimentation this side, because there is an expectation to win these kind of games that maybe it restricts Deschamps in trying new players and different ideas?
I think it does, but I think we also have to remember that Deschamps wasn't known for that anyway. Even before this tournament came into play, he knows what system works best. He knows what players work best in that system. I think that was certainly some people's slight criticism of Deschamps, was that maybe he's not the world's most flexible manager. In terms of changing things up, of experimenting with different players, different formations as regularly as he might, considering the number of friendly games that France played. But ultimately, I think the key thing for France is it does keep them competitive, and with the French team, and maybe less so with this particular team, but as we've seen in the past, keeping this team with the right mindset and keeping the national team in the right mindset, the players in the right mindset, is probably one of the biggest hurdles you have to overcome, I think, as French team manager. So I think having this tournament to keep the players switched on, to keep them competitive, as soon as the system doesn't starts to fail, then Deschamps will change, but as long as it continues to work for him and he continues to get the results, well, why change? He doesn't need to change. He's judged on the results. He's not necessarily judged on quality of performance. He's not judged on how many players and new players he bloods into the team, or how many weird and wonderful formations he plays. He's judged on, does he deliver those results? So he's an experienced enough manager that knows that if something doesn't work for the team, he won't use it. He won't play in that formation. He won't play with those players. So I can see the slight concern on that. But I think for me, the fact that everybody just keeps their wits about them, everybody just keeps that right side of being on edge, that actually this is still a competitive fixture. And you know what? If I don't perform in this game, my place in the squad could be in jeopardy. Whereas I think certainly we saw with friendlies that players did switch off because they thought, well, it doesn't really matter. I'll get in the squad and perform when I need to. Well, you need to, I think, in every game of this tournament. So I think it's been a really positive start. We've seen from the teams that coaches, it's not just France, but the teams that coaches have put out, they're taking this competition far more seriously than I thought they were going to. So I think, ultimately UEFA have to be applauded for trying something. I mean, whether it goes on to be a success or whether it goes on to be a long-term success, well, we'll judge that at the time. But first weekend, first round of fixtures, and I think it's proven to be that immediate success. I've enjoyed seeing, competitive games. It's not necessarily those drab friendlies where teams can't be bothered or they're making 10 changes at half time, and you just feel like, well, why is anybody here? These games matter, and it's good to see that teams are taking it seriously.
Well, that's the real positive so far in this tournament, isn't it? It's good to see teams have realised the value in it, really, but at the same time, putting the younger players or trying different things may be a little bit restricted, but you take the yin with the yang, really, and that's at least not too much of a problem for the French side. We're going to finish tonight with a little bit of Ligue 1 news, and it's involving Bordeaux. They have a new manager and potentially new owners, at least coming through the door, with the American owners seemingly getting their deal almost done. It's almost over the line from the looks of things. It's on its way, at least. But let's focus on the actual managerial change at first, Eric, and it is Ricardo, the Brazilian, rejoining as well. He was sporting director at Santos most recently. It's the second spell for the 53-year-old, having taken the reins back in 2005 to 2007, where he took them to a second place finish in a Coupe de la Ligue title as well. It's been a long while since we've seen him in these shores. Obviously managed Monaco as well, but he's not really managed anyone in particular other than in Brazilian football for the last few years at least. Does it feel like a bit of a risky move, given that he's obviously, like we mentioned, it's been a while since he's been a permanent coach, and also a while since he's been in European football as well?
Yeah, I don't know what to say. I mean, I think that given the levels of talent that we've seen managers come up from Ligue 2 and have a level of success, I think saw with Thierry Loret, with Strasbourg last year. We saw it with Christophe Pellissier. We've seen it for several years now with Stéphane Moulin. I can't conceive that there's not a manager currently working in Ligue 2 that Bordeaux, again, given all the money that they've made this summer from that sale of Malcolm, couldn't reach into their pocket to bring in a manager like that. And we've seen that, just because a manager has failed at one point in Ligue 1, comes back to Ligue 2, doesn't mean that they're dead and buried. I think that we've seen Alain Casanova come in at Toulouse and a team that I think many would have written off very quickly given the losses they had this offseason, and have them playing good solid football, playing on the front foot. And I just think that if Bordeaux felt this need to bring back this manager from their past, there's clearly an affinity that they have for him, and that they think that's the right choice. But I think that someone who has a better knowledge of developing young players, someone who has a better record of understanding what Ligue 1 is in the contemporary sense, makes a lot of sense. I think Bordeaux will have a very tricky season ahead. There's certainly a lot of exciting young talent there. Francois Camano looks to be continuing to improve. Samuel Kalou looks a very solid signing as well as those 11th hour signings likes of Cornelius as well. But I don't know. I feel that this is a potentially a huge misstep for Bordeaux. They've really not done very well in appointing managers in the last few years. I think Gus Poyet had a lot of potential, but clearly the club couldn't work with him on a personal level, and that is its own failing as well. I should mention. But I think we've seen Willy Sagnol, we've seen Jocelyn Gourvenec, Elie Bopp. I mean, there's been sorry, not Elie Bopp, but there's been a number of managers for Bordeaux in the recent past who just really haven't worked out. Really since that title-winning side, going back a decade now, they've sort of struggled for any level of consistency, any strong level of play. And I think that the departure of Poyet was certainly a disappointment for the board, but I think that they should have looked for a younger manager, someone operating in France with knowledge of the domestic league that could be sustainable. I know that's what they thought they had with Jocelyn Gourvenec, and it clearly didn't work out. But I think that a willingness to allow a manager time and to see the squad develop would have been a better choice.
and it's a convoluted one now as well, Rich, because obviously there has been news about the American owners. I know you have a little bit more on it. What have they said about their prospective takeover and what may happen to the club in the near future?
Well, they were on Telefoot this morning, and they a couple of things they discussed. They confirmed that they'd spoken with Thierry Henry about taking over, which I then, it's like, well, what's the strategy on the manager appointment here? Because on the one hand, you've gone for someone who's got no first team coaching experience. Obviously has been with Martinez in the Belgium setup, but I mean that's it. That's as far as his coaching experience has gone. And you were willing to consider taking a punt on him as his first team coach role, and then those talks break down, and then all of a sudden you've appointed someone who's not had experience in the league for, I mean, we're getting on for 10 years. 2009, I think he left Monaco. There might be a smallish group of Bordeaux fans who might think, oh yeah, Ricardo, we remember fond times. He had 2 good seasons with Bordeaux and helped lay the foundations that Blanc then came in and then eventually took the team to the title. But there'll be far more Bordeaux fans scratching their head thinking, is this another missed opportunity to make a real positive appointment that under the new regime can really take this team forward? So I think that is slightly confusing on that front. One of the other things that they did mention this morning was then this supposed 80 million that they're going to be bringing in. They were then quick to follow that up to say that's not necessarily an 80 million transfer kitty. That's very much not the case, and they're going to be taking a look across the entire infrastructure of the club. Obviously, they've got a nice brand new stadium, but they're going to look at training facilities. They're going to be looking at everything. So probably only a small portion of that 80 million will actually be assigned for transfer funds come January. But with that coming in, with that money coming in, new owners, fresh faces, it seemed there could have been a more positive appointment. It doesn't even necessarily need to be a long-term appointment. I think over the last few years, with the sort of failure of progressive or successive managers at Bordeaux, there's a real opportunity, I think, for someone with Ligue 1 experience just to come in and just slightly steady the ship in that first season and a half, 2 seasons under the new owners. Well, they got their feet under the table. They could actually now see, right, we're in charge. Let's actually have a look at this setup. How's it going to work? What's our plans actually going forward now that we're here? During that period, then, that sort of honeymoon period, there's an experienced manager who knows the division, who knows the players, who can, keep them competitive, with a view then to 2 years' time, they can bring in their real, I suppose, sort of first choice manager of choice. Maybe in 2 years' time that could have been Henry, who knows? But they then could have brought in that manager who then looks to take that project on to the next step. So I think it's a slightly confusing. There's no doubting his experience. He's got huge experience, and yes, he has Ligue 1 experience, but that was Ligue 1 in a completely different era. The Ligue 1 that we know now is as we know, far, far different from the Ligue 1 of 10, 12, 13 years ago, when he was last in France. So it's going to be interesting to see how he can readapt to life back in Ligue 1. It's a curious appointment. I don't hold out much hope for Bordeaux reaching the heights that they reached last season. So that could be quite a damning thing for the new American owners, that they may have to face up to, not qualifying for Europe. So yeah, I'm gonna be keeping a close eye on that one, because it strikes me as a slightly unwise appointment, and perhaps an unnecessary appointment with it as well.
It's going to be interesting, as always. It seems to be at Bordeaux at the moment, at least, seeing if that move pays off for them, because it's just as much of a risk as it is for something like Thierry Henry, because he's been out for so long, and obviously the past glories as well will come back to him. But we've seen it with Casanova and others. It's going to be an interesting one, at least anyway. That's all that we have for this week. A little bit of a shorter episode this week, but we will be back with a preview show this upcoming Thursday. My thanks to Eric, Rich, and all of you listening at home, and do tune in again next week for another one of our episodes. Thank you for your viewing, and a bientôt, and goodbye.